Okay, so the audio on this video was absolutely deplorable, even worse than the first episode of this series. We've had all sorts of camera trouble, and we've actually lost a good amount of video. So this video and the next couple of videos will be a mix of voiceover, an older camera that we have that has less than optimal audio but is nowhere near as bad as what this camera was performing. So what I'm doing here is I'm working on the buckets to get the toilet valve installed to keep the bucket full for the watering system. Normally I use a hole saw for this, but I forgot it, so utility knife it is. These are just a standard $9 off-the-shelf toilet valve at your box store, DIY place kind of thing. Probably a pretty good guess which box store I happened to hit that I was nearby at the time, based on the bucket. But you can get them at any place. They all work about the same. I do like the ones that have the round float on a slide and their adjustable height. That way I can have them be all the way to the top of the bucket. It seems like it just works out a little bit better. I can adjust it and get as much water in the bucket as I can. It tends to stay a little bit more temperate. The fuller the bucket is, the temperature swings aren't as great. If I do have a water outage, from the water supply side, the municipal water, it gives me another gallon or two that I have some buffer. So that works out pretty good. This is the back side of our barn. This used to be a house. It was vacant when we bought the property, in really, really bad shape. Been gutted, all the plaster out. It had a fire in a portion. The part that I'm standing here, you can see that door open in there to the chicken coop. This was a burnt out back porch that I've rebuilt for the chicken coop. Just inside there, that concrete mixer behind me, this is where I usually make my feed. I've got some of my equipment is out of service right now, broke down, and the place is just generally a mess. I got a lot to do. Some of that falls to the side though, because we are rebuilding an old house from the 1920s, which is also videos you'll find on the channel. So you can see I'm testing the fit there for the hole. The advantage of putting that in the center, I'll show you here. Hole in the middle, just an inexpensive toilet valve. I like them because they're inexpensive, easy to find. You can keep a couple around, although I've never had one fail. So it just leave the rubber washer on there, hand tighten that nut down so it's good to go. Both buckets get set up the same way. The bucket for the main chicken coop and the bucket for the Brooder project are identical. Just the cup count is what's different. I do have new cups ordered. I cleaned the ones that we'd been using previously, but they were showing their age. They have a little needle and seat set up that keeps them from overflowing as they fill up, and those rubber seats get worn down after time. These cups have been in here for 2 years, I think, and they're pretty inexpensive. So you can see here I'm kind of pulling them apart, working on cleaning them. 2 of them were leaking, just dribbling, but I don't like them to seep because then it just ends up being a mess. My little project bench here is actually our old Brooder. Works pretty good, but it was sort of a pain in the butt. Always had to find some place to put it. There you can see I got this one apart. That little white part in there is the seat, and there's a little plastic needle valve up in there, and that spring holds that cup up while it's empty, and then as the weight of the water pulls it down, it pushes that white rubber seat up against the needle and shuts the water off. Well, as they get worn and that rubber cup gets indented, they end up seeping over time, and a lot of times cleaning them will help, but In this case, it didn't really. Two of the three were seeping, so I ultimately end up taking some other cups that I had around. They're the other style where they have the small little valve in there that looks like a yellow flower cone, and the chickens are curious about it and they peck it and they learn pretty quick that when they stick their beak in there, it dribbles some water and they can have access to water. So those work pretty good, but I find that they tend to leak a lot more frequently the way they're built. We've also had a lot of trouble in the past with chickens getting a little wild and crazy, whatever chickens do, and they can actually knock the cups off because the cups twist fit on, and then the valve is actually just a friction fit inside of that. So been several occasions where we've went to feed for the day and they've knocked off a cup and the valve is open and you got a 1/4 inch hole or an 1/8 inch hole just dribbling water for hours and hours. But you can see here I'm fastening in these first cups. I do like these round cups a lot better. They're much larger. It's easier for the chickens to drink out of them. They actually come with a small wing nut that helps fasten them to the back. The other ones you're supposed to kind of try to thread them into the side of your container or your pipe or whatever, and they just never hold that well. I usually end up getting a brass nut or something and putting on the back to make sure they don't get pulled out. There you can see we got all the cups in. These are the ones I ultimately end up replacing. Got the hole cut in just my regular bucket lid. I do think I'm going to ultimately buy the lids that are two-piece, where you knock on the ring and then the lid screws down. They're stronger. The spacing ends up being a little better. So what I did there is I just took the valves together. I fastened the line onto the valve first, and then to the toilet valve in the bucket, and then turned it on. The weight of the water will hold it down. You can see here that cup closest to the camera doesn't set right because of the bucket lid style. The lid is too deep. That's why I'm going to transition to the other lids, I think, at least for the lower bucket. There, they're kind of filling up. End up cutting some plywood spacers to put under this to solve that problem. You can see how simple this setup is. It is so easy. It's so low maintenance. These valves just have a collar down there low that you slide off and you can adjust the height of the valve. I don't know if I show it, but I end up adjusting this. I basically want them to almost touch the bucket lid. They're just super reliable. It's an easy way if you've got water in your barn or water into your coop that you can always have water. You know, if something happens and for some reason your chickens are out of feed for a day or something, you know, you're out of town, you get held up, whatever, they can go a little bit without a little feed. You can sneak in and feed them the next morning or whatever, but man, not having water is really detrimental, more so than probably most things. Checking out my concrete work there. It's not perfectly smooth, but I don't need it to be. I built all this brooder. This is all the parts are coming out of one sheet of 3/4 inch regular pine plywood. I didn't want any pressure treated plywood exposed to the chickens. Never really had any trouble out of it, but it's enclosed, it's protected. I didn't see any sense that I needed pressure treated lumber here. One, it's less expensive, which is nice. And two, I figured the 3/4 of an inch, it would offer some temperature stabilization. I won't call it insulating value necessarily, but wouldn't be just wild temperature swings. This brooder ended up being about 30 inches wide, 24 inches tall at the back, and 5.5 feet long. If you were building this completely from scratch, of course I'm putting it into an existing corner, So I made two ends, the front, the top, and what ended up being the door, out of this one sheet. If you needed to make a bottom that you didn't want a concrete bottom, or and a back, you would need one more sheet of plywood to complete it. So that'd be about $90 in materials, not counting screws. I didn't glue anything together. This is just all, it's just screwed together in the end, and that way if I ever decide to move it, decide to alter it, it's pretty straightforward to do so. What I'm doing here is just marking my 30-inch pieces, working out my division. It should always come out, or at least in theory, that 16 inches wide should make the three parts, the top, the front, and the door. This is one of the nicer days. If you're watching the channel or checking on the channel, you'll see that this video is actually several days old. We've actually got the chicks, and they're in the brooder and doing well. So what I'm doing here is working out my positioning. I really like these little plastic floor grates, like for home heating. They just have a lever that operates it. You can close it up. The grate is small enough that things can't get through it. Put one on the end, and I put one up high on the end. The other one is down low on the far side, so there's some cross ventilation there if I need it. But it's a good way to have ventilation without worrying about infiltration of other things. We do like to brood our chicks with our big chickens, not exposed to the chickens, because they'll give them a go trying to establish the pecking order. And that's, unfortunately, if you've got chickens, you know that that's pretty hard on them. You can lose several, but the old chickens will at least get used to hearing the new chickens, and then as they get big enough, the door is set up so we can let them out, and they can still get in and have shelter without the adult chickens being able to get access to them. Starting my cutting up here, getting my pieces all knocked apart. While we're watching me work, the gray tarp to the right there is just temporarily up there. That wall is a summer project here. That is our hay storage. The two doors there fold open to have an 8x8 opening. It's where we store all of our hay. It's kind of a L-shaped space. It's definitely not a traditional barn by any means, but we think it's turning out pretty cool. It's shaping up a little at a time. It's always been a as we have time and as we have money kind of project. Everything we've done with our property, we've done out of pocket. Working on getting that vent opening knocked out here. Probably could have done a little cleaner job with the jigsaw, but we're not doing finished carpentry. We're making a chicken brooder, so this is definitely close enough. There you go. So in my test fit here, I'm a little shy and end up trimming that out just a hair. Outside of the plywood siding here on the barn, a lot of the framing and stuff we've recycled and reused, and as we've taken parts of the old house apart, we've kept it and used it to build things. Our loafing shed for the cows is about 85% recycled material. A lot of the structure here that holds the chicken coop is it's recycled or leftovers from other projects and things. I definitely like taking advantage of leftovers and recycling stuff. Some of that lower pressure treated plywood is on its third life. It's been through a couple different evolutions of usage in projects. It definitely is a good way, if you have a little bit of time, to make the most of your money by recycling and reusing. There's more that we would have liked to have saved out of this old house. Like you can see, it's got lap siding on it, but it's so brittle and bad, and it is actually nailed directly to the studs. It's a very, I don't really know what year this house was originally built, but it was on sandstone piers, and the siding was nailed directly to the studs. It didn't even have tar paper under it, so it's been around for a minute, and hopefully when we get done turning it into a barn, it'll be around for quite a bit longer for us or whoever might come next. So what I'm doing here is back cutting the sides. I realized when I made that first cut that I was off by ½ an inch. Worked out all right. I just refigured a little bit on how I was going to do my layout and had enough to do it in the end, which is all that really matters, I suppose. So I decided that with that being a little bit wider, I would make it my door skin because it needed to be beveled on both sides. This almost is like a poorly dubbed overseas movie. You can see me talking for the original audio, but now here I am voicing over. I'm getting pretty close for construction here. So what I'm doing on this part is this is the far end, and because I'm going to take the front and the end closest to us and lap it down over that original frame, you can see here I'm getting ready to mark it so I can fasten it to that wood frame. The other piece is actually going to set on top of the concrete and be secured to that back wall. This space that the chicken coop is in has actually been used for a few things. It was originally, we framed it in and it was just an open space. We used it for a shelter for a couple calves. I think we had some pigs in it. Then ultimately framed it in and turned it into the coop that it is now 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly, but that two different colors of plywood there. The lower plywood is actually pressure treated plywood from a swimming pool project that I built 8-9 years ago now, somewhere around there. So it's been around a while. Of course, the chicken's having a mess, and we really enjoy having ducks, but we really hate the mess that ducks make. I will never put ducks in my chicken coop again. They absolutely just destroy a chicken coop because of how they like to play in the water. Several times here through the video, you might be able to see we have a groundhog or something that is burrowing into the coop and enjoying the persistent available water and the good quality chicken feed that we have, either the feed that we make or the feed that we get from our local ag service. So you can see here, I'm doing a little fitting. Had to fit this one end up a little bit. That wall that it butts up to is not plumb, never was, and definitely will never be, but it's close enough for a barn. I made it stable where it'll never move and got it fastened up strong. These are some 2-inch spacks. I think they're called HCR exterior screws with a pan head on them. I really like these for building stuff. They hold things down really, really well with that pan head, and they don't split lumber out. My only complaint is that they do not have a very sharp starting point. We've been pretty excited to get this brooder put together. We had actually ordered the chicks a while back and realized we were coming up on the deadline and didn't want to mess with the portable brooder again because we've kind of stuck it wherever we could and had to run a cord to the heat lamp, and it worked, but it wasn't the most practical setup in the world by any means. Having this will allow us, we've been talking about hatching some chicks. We do have a very good incubator that we've hatched chickens before a couple of times. I think we might again. The chickens that we just got, we ordered those from Cackle Hatchery here in Missouri. They ordered 25, they always put a couple extra in. We ended up with 28, so that gives us about 37 chickens, including our rooster right now. We've been talking about maybe going up to 40 or 45. We're a little bit undecided. So what I was doing there, I was just scribing a little bit to kind of get some fit. You can see I notched that bottom to fit around that original frame board and get my fit the way I wanted it. We've also been looking forward to this style of brooder because the temperatures will stay pretty stable in it. We ended up putting a digital thermostat with a remote sensor on it. In the cooler weather, the heat lamp won't ever shut off, probably, but we do have it set that if we get a really warm day, that those chicks aren't in that brooder with the heat lamp that's just blaring away. That wall to the back, that's got 150 bales of hay stacked up against it, so it's pretty well insulated. The wall to my left there, it's not insulated at all. That's going to eventually be another part of the barn on the other side of that wall. It's a good sized room that we're going to turn into actually a canning kitchen. The barn is going to serve two purposes. I guess really three purposes. Barn life, canning kitchen for the farm, and probably a little bit of a repair shop on the front side, closest to the public street that it faces.
This chicken coop is about 9.5 feet wide, about 12, 14 feet long, something about like that. I don't know exactly. I haven't. It's been a while since I measured it. You can see the roost there in the bottom left corner of the screen. That's going to get rebuilt. I'm going to take it all the way out, get it cleaned up. We're really debating a concrete floor because of the groundhog. I'm sure it's got to be a groundhog because whatever it is isn't killing the chickens. It's just in there for the feed and the water. And it's a burrowing machine. I don't know what else it would be that wouldn't be harming the chickens. The concrete floor would definitely stop that. I do prefer animals to be on dirt. Of course, they're going to get a new pen here in the next month or two. So having a concrete floor in the coop wouldn't be the end of things by any means. Measuring there for the back support board that'll get screwed to the wall. And I'm going to test fit my top. So that wall isn't square. It's off a little. I end up having to trim this out a little, get it where I want it. There we go. I probably walk into that chain hanging there 100 times during this build, and I have yet to take it down. The chain in the middle is actually hanging the feeder. I'm going to snap me a line here so I can have a nice straight shot. I think that board might have been a little bit bowed, or either way I just want to make sure I had a even straight row across there. If you're wondering about the funnel on the bucket, that's simply to keep the chickens from roosting on it. I've used that funnel for that purpose for quite some time, and it's worked pretty well. I should probably find a plastic one. That's actually a fairly old antique funnel, but I found it at the farm, and it was full of dirt, and I knocked it around and knocked it out, and it's kind of been a chicken funnel, anti-chicken funnel, I guess, since then. Making pretty good progress now. I wasn't too worried about that board wasn't quite long enough, and I didn't care if it made it all the way to the other end because that 3/4 inch plywood's pretty strong. I did want it to be able to fasten this end into it though, because I did not screw it to that wall in any other way. I figured that holding it together like this would do the trick. And it seems to be plenty strong. Reminding myself to scoot away from that edge there since I already put a screw in it. End up splitting the board out. I'm really starting to see the idea of how this is going to work now. The big part will be the lid there on the front. Nice wide opening, easy access to get in and out. Those buckets stay super clean because of how they're put together with the lids, so cleaning them is pretty rare. Cleaning the cups is pretty frequent, but it's pretty simple. Most of the time the bucket that's in the coop itself, I just take the garden hose in there and just splash them out once a week or something, or take a watering can. It doesn't take a whole lot because what's in the bottom is always wet and loose and just a little bit of sediment. The The buckets can, over time, get some really super fine dust down in the bottom, but it settles out. And with the cups being fastened, usually about 1.5 inches up off the bottom of the bucket, I never seem to pick any of it up. It's always settled out at the bottom without any trouble. What I'm doing here is just making me a couple catch blocks so I can lay that front lid up there and get a test fit on it. Must have left it laying way out there. There we go. You'll see I put it on here and realize I need a little bit more of a spacer at the bottom. Debating about what to do. Trust me, I decide I need a spacer. I've seen this. I just fastened this up with a couple of surface mount hinges here in a minute. It seems like plenty of hinge. I can drive them. They do have removable pins if I need to take it out. Probably never will, just because the lid flips all the way over and leans up against the wall and is out of the way. I don't even bother putting a latch on it. It's heavy enough that without opposable thumbs, I don't think anything's going to get it open. This is just some scrap 3/4 inch plywood here. Gets it good and even, or at least even enough. This size brooder, I don't know that we'd ever put about more than maybe 30 chicks in it at a time. It's pretty good size, but I don't really like letting them get crowded because you hit that 4-week mark and they're starting to get kind of big and kind of antsy. And as you'll see in later video, I do cut a good sized door in the front of it here and get it all set up that we can regulate who's in and out. But still, I don't like them to be crowded. As you've noticed, I'm not a big fan of pre-drilling holes. I'd have to tally up exactly what we spent building this. I mean, it's over $100, I'm sure, by the time we add the wiring, the light fixtures, handles, hinges, plywood, screws, the concrete. I didn't really wasn't a whole lot of stuff to recycle or reuse here to build this. When we get to the new chicken pen, you'll see a lot of reused lumber come into play. I've got a pile of 1-inch decking boards and stuff from a salvage deck that I picked up. We're going to do a lot of the pin framing with that, and kind of debating exactly what size and layout, and if we want it to be one big pin or two dividable paddocks like we do for the cows. I don't know. You'll have to wait and see what that turns into. It might be quite the project by the time it gets underway. firming up my fit here. Ended up needing a little bit of a that's just me pouring some tea. Decided I needed a little bit of a spacer there. Turns out that carpenter pencil was just right. Made them hinges fit just like I felt like they should. That did produce a small gap there at the top, you can see. That doesn't really bother me. I don't feel like we have such a heat deficit with one heat lamp in there that it would ever be a problem. If I decide that it is, I can either add another heat source, or I can just simply go get some inexpensive foam weather stripping and put on it to make it seal. If you don't currently have chickens, I would definitely encourage you, current world situation notwithstanding, to get you some. They're fun to have around. Our girls enjoy them, except maybe the roosters if they're a little mean, but or a little bit protective. But otherwise, they enjoy them. The responsibility is good for the kids, and they really like the farm eggs. They are all about the eggs. Here I'm just eyeballing the middle for the handle. Definitely close enough for chicken work. Alright. Just like that, nice and simple. We're not doing anything fancy here. It's all about function. Most space out of the least amount of material. Here I've cut some just 1/8 inch plexiglass, which is ridiculously expensive right now, in case you didn't know that. I'm just going to mark out the corners, and then I'm going to take my level and draw the width of the level inside of that so I can cut it out. And then I will drill some holes, pre-drill, which only goes so well. I still end up cracking it in a few spots, but we wanted a way to see in, and honestly for the other chickens to see the new chickens. It lets them get a little bit familiar. Not doing anything artistic here. We're just eyeballing it and roughing it out pretty close. Except for, you'll see I end up doing this on both of them. There's a piece of plastic that corner didn't mark. And I still want it to be close, you know. Making pretty good progress on this one. The next couple of videos end up showing the rest of the brooder build, and then wiring, kind of getting the rest of it all set up. And if you're, like I say, if you're following the channel, you've seen that the chicks are already actually in it. They came the day of this voiceover, and they are in there doing well. They are enjoying the space, staying warm. They're scattered out good. They're not all clustered up like they're cold, and they're not in a ring like they're too hot, which is exactly what you want to see. Now we do have that digital thermostat in there, and we can tell what temperature is, at least in the middle of the back wall of the brooder, which it's always warmer right underneath the lamp, but it's about 80 degrees on that back wall, so ought to be pretty good. I'm going to drill me a little hole here and get ready to cut this out. I brought the absolute dullest drill bit I believe I have. This is me deciding that the jigsaw is too slow, and I'm going to get the skill saw. We're going to make some sawdust. Now we're getting it done. This ends up turning out really good. I end up being really happy with it. I think it ended up today, the day of this construction, I ended up having to stop because I ended up running out of batteries. I didn't bring a charger with me and thought I'd get further than I did, even though I never seemed to get as far as I think I will. If you've ever considered chickens, you don't have to have a great big chicken coop. You don't have to have a brooder box built like this. You can get a dozen chickens and you can buy a good size Rubbermaid tote from your local box store, and you can get started. It doesn't take a huge amount. A 4x8 chicken coop will do you good for a long time. I would always discourage people to not go buy the little wire coops that look like a little hut that are about 4x4, and they're just really not adequate. Build a coop 4 foot by 8 foot that's 6 or 8 foot tall that you can step into and clean it out and build them a pen. Doesn't have to be a huge pen. If you have a 4x8 coop and a 8x8 pen, that's enough for a dozen chickens to be comfortable and to be happy, and to have a good life and produce good eggs for you. And it's really not too much work once you get set up and going if you do it right. It works out pretty good, and the reward is definitely there. And if you like eggs, it'll probably even save you money at this point. If you see me tip that jigsaw over, it helps it line up, especially if it's still cycling a little. It won't bounce off the board quite so bad. I do say I really enjoyed building this brooder. It was an addition to our chicken setup that we've been talking about a while. I've been wanting to build for a while. It'll make our chicken rearing easier than it's ever been, more reliable than it's ever been. Not that our other brooder was bad, but this is definitely an improvement. It's hard to beat a purpose-built setup that will be really good at what it's supposed to do. It's just sometimes you got to have something that's only good at one thing because you need it to be really good at that one thing. And keeping young chicks a good temperature, even if you'd like to do it in the summer where you don't need a heat lamp, it's worth the effort. And you don't always need a heat lamp. That's a popular misconception. If it's warm summer weather and you give them good bedding, you'll later on in the next few videos towards the end, I have a grinder. I grind hay to make feed. got a small screen in it, and I ground up a bunch of straw, and we lined it with about an inch or inch and a half of ground straw. The pieces of straw are maybe a quarter of an inch long. It's almost like grain, like rice grain in a sense, or wheat. And it's very comfortable for the chicks. It's very easy to clean. It stays dry. It doesn't rot. It's very effective. And if you have that in the summer in that brooder box, they'll do fine. You know, if you're having 80, 90 degree days and 80 degree nights, you can even get by without a lamp. You know, because they'll huddle. If they get cool, they'll huddle, and they'll pull through, and they'll be all right. You know, sometimes you lose chicks. That's always the case, even with a purpose-built brooder like this. We do always have our chicks, if we purchase them, we have them vaccinated for Marek's disease. No evidence that we've had it at the farm, but I really don't want to ever let it get started either. Now, obviously, if we hatch our own, we do not vaccinate because we don't have access to it. Just using some screws I drummed up that I had laying around here at the farm from other projects to put this plexi in. We're getting there. The next two videos show it getting finished up. The audio is okay on the next ones. Video is okay. This camera that recorded this video actually recorded really good video and really, really terrible audio. So the permanent solution to that problem is in the works. Little cleanup here, and we're going to call it a day for that part of the build and for this part of the video. It comes together good. Hopefully you'll tune in and see the next two videos in the series. Thanks for watching.